So I'm actually a little bit curious to hear your workouts. Usually it's a little bit more of Sam-centric, but I think with everything I always look at it for the most part is there's never a black or white one side or the other side response. Usually it's always kind of a gradient with a sweet spot in the middle, and I think training is a very good example of that. There are things where the only way that you're going to get results is to really lock yourself in to a steady routine and repeat it. Right? Don't change anything. Don't try to make it flashy. Don't try to add or switch it up every other day. Just do the same thing over and over again and repeat it. Right? But that's completely neglecting the idea of new ideas of different kinds of training, different things to throw into your workouts, where if you give yourself this completely boxed in mentality of you're doing the same workouts that you did in your high school weight room back in the 90s or the whatever, then you're missing out. But if you're always trying to change your shit up, and it's you're trying to do okay, who should I do low intensity? Should I do high volume? And you're kind of just being constantly led in different directions consistently. Well, then you're never really gonna get anywhere specific, because you're missing the consistency aspect of just repeating hours on the regular of the same kind of working out and reaping the benefits. So how I look at that is I think I have similar skeletons, right? Similar frameworks of workouts that I do a lot, but I do at least always try to change it up in some way or another. And for me, that basic framework, volume-wise, usually pretty similar. By the time I've done 7 or 8 good sets total for a body part, that's usually about right. Sometimes less, sometimes more, but usually somewhere around that area, that's good. But, maybe one day I'll do or not one day, but maybe I'll do a lift where it's a lighter squeezing, not so set by set, failure, and try to up the volume of the workout rather than the individual set intensity. I almost have to do that for quads a little bit, because if I go too crazy on a heavy set of squats, it almost puts me out of commission for any other really good heavy pressing, because now I'm just either a combination of too sore, too fatigued, to whatever, to really get anything out of more sets. So sometimes I'll do a lighter weight on Smith machine and just do a few sets of 10, where it's a hard set, it's not nothing, but it's not total failure, so I can kind of get, instead of just one wild set of 10, a still decently wild set totaling 40 reps, right? And part of what makes me think that for legs, going on a little tangent, is when I see the guys who really throwing in a lot of lunges. You're not doing one wild, insane, crazy, heavy rep of a lunge. The point of it is just that kind of fatiguing, just soreness building effect of kind of a longer set, So I as much as I like trying to make most sets, heavy and wild, they're not all going to be like that. But my main point there is I just want to kind of hear what some of the rules that you guys sort of follow, because for me, like I said, I got the 8 set-ish rule, where it's not even a rule, but it's by the time I've done 7 or 8, I know yeah, that's about as much as I'm going to get out of this workout for me as I can. But when I was a beginner, I used to do 5 movements, 5 sets each, because that was what I thought the weight was. And kind of pyramid weight up every set, where I would do push downs with the rope of 100 pounds, then 110, 120, and just do things like that, much higher volume. And those sets weren't all to total crazy failure. And I think it's not always the easiest thing for people to say. I think I've got a reasonable degree of humility when it comes to the working out, that I don't think I know everything, and I do want to kind of hear what else anybody has to say training wise, because I don't want to limit myself to new ideas. You know, if I hear something that really makes sense and clicks, or I see someone do like a specific, you know, a specific set of something, and I'm like, oh, that actually looks pretty cool, right? I'm not just, if that maybe falls out of line of like what I normally do, I'm not just going to write it off, right? I at least want to put it into, you know, my own practice and see what happens. Because worst case scenario, I try it, I don't like it. Maybe I try it again in a month, because sometimes movements don't always click the first time. You know, but best case scenario, I got a whole new badass back movement, maybe like a finisher or something, that I never would have thought of on my own, which now I get to reap the benefits from, you know? So that's sort of my main point. Try not to think that you know it all is, you know, there's probably a cooler way to end that quote in like a more eloquent kind of fashion, but yeah, not an awesome thought to have, right? Always be ready to hear the next big thing, but don't be so, you know, persuaded by it that you drop all the other shit you've been doing the whole time and then just, you know, start doing the most random new wave whatever. Right, but I think nothing else to say, plus I'm getting blinded. Let's get started. There we go. Let's start with some wide grip machine pull downs. So very light stack, but the machine is so smooth, I just kind of like this. And this is essentially my version of like starting triceps with a rope extension. Lighter, squeezing, really emphasizing a burring hold. And then, you know, once I'm a little warmer, I'll feel more comfortable doing kind of a nastier set of something later. So out of any kind of set you can do, a light squeezing with the start, very difficult to go wrong. I can say that much. One more. That's good. One more was good. After 3 of those, let's move on to something else. Plan here. Not so squeezing, but a little bit more pump motivated, right? So instead of sitting and doing like a good hold squeeze at the back or at the top, you could say, I just want to really bust out as many kind of faster-ish narrow grip rows as I can, you know, and not for no reason. You know, I'm not saying just move weight around for its own sake, but you know, I'm not joking. I really do think that there's a point to what you might call a little bit more pumpish, less controlled sets, and I'm still controlling it. It's just a little bit faster paced, You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, it's a good back and forth. For every light squeezing movement, there might be a slightly heavier one, not heavier by much, faster pumpish one, and then back and forth, back and forth. But with a narrow grip and a V-bar like this, I'm definitely getting a bit more lat than upper back of a row. So I might go pull downs, V-bar row, you know, having your elbows down, that's very lat focused. And then next might be something wider grip, more flared elbows, a lot more trap. But I'll decide that once these sets are over. This is getting my main focus right now. Ooh. Okay. One more of those. Gee, this pull down's hit me harder than I thought. This will be good. Oh, let's do drops. Oh, okay. One of those is actually enough. Not loving how that feels, but we're close to done. Let's get one more good one to something and pose down. See how we're looking.
Good. Come on. 3 more. 2 to 3. 2 to 3. Come on. 3. Big dog. Right. Come on. Easy. Easy. One more. Hit him. Come on. Try. Yes. There you go. Attaboy. Sam, come on. Pull.
That's good. I'm up. What?
You like that?
Yeah, actually, I felt my biceps activate, so that set was total bullshit. There we go. Yeah, that was a good one. I can leave the gym feeling good about that. But yeah, it's much more so now about baseline strength, size, maintenance. Because for what I would describe as all intents and purposes, you're not going to gain much, if any, noticeable muscle when you're getting leaner and dieting. Now, if you're doing a recomp in the state where you're a beginner, let's say you might be a heavier dude or just a regular body fat kind of 12%er dude, you don't work out yet. If you start lifting hard in a deficit, since you've never worked out before, the stimulus is so new, you will put on some new muscle, right? That's what we call newbie gains, right? But if you've been lifting for a while, you know, and progress is not just magically ramping up out of nowhere, and you're not exactly plateaued, but you're not just like, you know, maxing out every other week, up in weight, whatever, then, you know, so let's just say someone who's in a state of either deciding, okay, I want to cut up and see where I'm looking, or bulk up and see just how much more mass I can put on, you know, and obviously in either case, you know, responsible bulk. To bulk and get too much body fat on, and then you've basically just given yourself a worse problem, because now you got to take that body fat off. And if you cut too crazy hard, then you're going to lose some muscle in the process, you know. But there is a sweet spot of doing both, where you do it gradually to the point of not getting too soft in an off season or in a bulking phase, and still holding on to all your size in a diet, you know. But in either case, it's I mean, once you've lifted for a while, it's either you're gaining some size with some body fat. You don't have to put on a ton of body fat. Really, you should only put on as much as is absolutely necessary. But in a diet, you're getting leaner, but you're not going to get much bigger. But the kind of trick, the sweet spot to that, is the fact that you do get this sort of, bigger effect, kind of an illusion almost. Because the leaner you get, the more separated and kind of proportional your build gets, and you will look bigger. So it doesn't really matter. Like, you're going to stay the same size. Like, let's say I have, not including my bones or my, organs or whatever. Let's say I've got 100 pounds of muscle, maybe 150, I don't know. Let's say 100 pounds with maybe 15 pounds of body fat, whatever that number really is. I'm going to diet over the course of these next few weeks, and let's say I have a similar amount of muscle. Let's even say I lost 5 pounds. Not like I got all of those fibers like digested and broken down, but they do, when you're not as full of carbs and water, they do shrink down a touch. Right? It's just kind of part of it, right? But let's say I've got 95 pounds of muscle now, or just contractile tissue. If I've only got 3 pounds of fat, that relative ratio, I'm going to look way crazier in that cut up state, because all my proportions and grains and cuts and everything are just going to be so much cooler. So that's the plus. That's the fun part about dieting down, is you get this extra illusion of size, like even more than someone who's bigger and bulked. But that's where you really are bigger when you're lifting heavier weights and just actually making solid progress. But I guess the point I'm trying to get at is don't get thrown off by the idea of what I would call kind of, I mean, it's just this weird, I don't even know how to describe it exactly. But as far as I look at it, having it be that simple gives me a good starting point to stick to a consistent routine, because it sounds amazing to say, oh, you don't actually have to eat that much food and you'll just grow. Oh, you don't actually have to do that much cardio. You can just burn body fat. So as far as I'm concerned, the biggest proponents or components of any kind of change to your build, be it size gain, fat loss, it's going to be, basically a trifecta of just consistent training, eating, and sleeping. Sleeping's pretty basic. That's probably the simplest one of all. Just get some good sleep. Right? Try to sleep at least 7 hours, whatever. Honestly, just sleep as much as you can. I'd say that's a good goal. Right? Don't stay up till 3 on the regular. Right? So that's simple enough. So that's one down. Right? So there's only 2 things left. The training consistency. You can train a lot of different ways. As long as your effort's there, honestly, I'm not going to freak. If you tell me you love upper lower and you're making solid gains, who am I to say that's wrong? Well, I wouldn't even think that, because if you're making gains, clearly it's working, right? Your results will speak for themselves. That's cool. But with the dieting side of things, I could change basically nothing about my training. 30 minutes of cardio in the morning, a pump in the afternoon, the occasional rest day when necessary. That doesn't really change, right? But for me to manipulate how much food I'm eating, that's why every 6 months I'm very drastically different. Real kind of bigger, a little puffier from being kind of softer, or just crazy cut up like a freaking freak, and hitting the side chest with the grain of 100-year-old hardwood creeping over my shoulder. Right? That's what I'm getting excited for right now. And there's nothing that the training changed to induce that look, to induce that actual body fat burning. So that's why I really just want to keep it simple with macro tracking, calorie manipulation, because that really will work. Like I could write out on paper, I don't know, there would be a lot of rules. Like if I could write out the Sam Sulek approach to bulking, to cutting, to whatever, I think I could write it out in a way that if someone actually did all of those things, then it would totally work. Now, it's a little different because I could just write out, eat 2,000 calories a day, train every day, repeat. like that would work, but that's not a routine, you know. So that's where it's much more nuanced than just saying you got to eat less to cut and you got to eat more to bulk. Like there is more to it, but it doesn't make those phrases any less true, if you know what I'm saying, you know. So as much as there's a lot of play that you can get into with, you know, how you're working out or what your routine looks like or, you know, anything along those lines, I think there are a few good rules or like baseline aspects to lean back on and kind of build your routine up from. And not even your routine, but just like your understanding of how all this shit is going down, you know. Like the idea that if you did, you know, an hour of cardio or 30 minutes of cardio, it might not be in your best interest to do a workout, like a weight-based workout, an hour later with no food in between, because you just burned through a little bit of your glycogen stores. You're kind of a little bit more fatigued, and kind of, not even fatigued, but just tired from doing that. So maybe it'd be good to separate the two, or just, you know, do your cardio after the workout itself. You know, I think that's not a bad substitute for morning cardio. I think morning cardio is a little better, but 30 minutes post-lift, as long as you got some food with you, I think you're totally cool, you know. But what I like to see is when guys don't necessarily just follow a cookie cutter plan or like always just say the same thing that everybody else is saying. What I really like to see is guys that have their own version of an understanding of calories and macros and, you know, meals or whatever, and it can be different from guy to guy, you know. Like when I talk about calories, I'm talking about like just straight up calories, like how many grams of this I'm eating, how many whatever, you know. Some guys like talking about meals, like how many meals are you eating a day, you know, because that's their metric. Like a meal is 60 grams of whatever, and they're going by meals rather than just tracking everything like so loosely like I might, where I don't have to eat just 3 meals. Like I can kind of have maybe a bigger one or a smaller one, or I can have a snack, and I just count the calories in those things individually, right? So it's just something where if you get it, then you can kind of be, I think, a little bit more open to discussions with other guys who have their own different, you know, understanding or experience, because I think you just kind of get a better gist for it, you know. Like I could read all about being a mechanic, but just from like reading a book alone, I wouldn't know nearly as much as the guy who has just, you know, been at the auto shop for however many years, who's like seen basically everything, has gotten his hands on it and really has a good understanding of it, because, you know, he's actually kind of been there and done it and tried things for himself and saw what worked, you know. So I guess how I look at that is more so like a call to action to just, like with everything that we talk about with working out, when it comes to cardio or calories or training and frequency, like maybe don't just kind of pick an authority and listen to everything they say and defend everything that they say because they said it and they have X experience or X results. I think some guys are good authorities, you know, but I think it's more so just a good setup to, you know, take in information about working out, and there's a ton, all right? There's millions of hours of videos of people talking about working out throughout the entire internet. It's a very big pool, you know, not to mention all the older, like, you know, Arnold Encyclopedia, CD, DVD tapes that have been archived. Like, there's no limit. You know, you could try to watch everything there is that's been posted about working out. You'll never watch it all. So I want to be the kind of guy who can watch it, think about it, and think, okay, does this make sense? Do I understand why less food would make me burn through body fat? Do I understand why I should be doing cardio? Like what, like, you know, and it's not something you have to figure out. Like, you can listen to people's explanations, but a lot of guys are just kind of, I don't want to say full of shit, but you can explain away a lot of things about working out, and let's say you're a bigger dude, you can kind of just make it make sense, you know? Like I could, if I posted a video tomorrow where I was like, all right guys, you know, I think, I don't know, imagine me saying like something stupid, but I explained it really well and like made a lot of analogies. Like, to some, especially guys who don't really know about working out, they might hear that and think, oh, that makes sense. Huh. You know, so it's something where being able to think for yourself a little bit, in the sense of like, does this make any sense? Or I don't know with this. I don't know about that. You know, just having a reasonable amount of doubt is definitely a good thing when it comes to the you know, watching people talk about working out, and that applies to me too, right? Do not just be thinking Sam said it, that's right. You know, be like, is Sam full of shit right now? Right? You got to hold me, and if I say anything crazy, you got to call me out for it. You know, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm certainly not an objective source of information. I think I'm a semi-objective source of my own experience and like how I think about things, but that doesn't mean it's always right. You know, so that's kind of the pursuit. You know, the smart lifter, the growing lifter, growing both physically and mentally. He's always trying to expand his understanding. Why should I do this curl? Why shouldn't I do this? Why should just things like that? You know, and it doesn't have to be that deep all the time, but it is worth thinking about. Or else, like I was saying on the way to the gym tonight, like I don't want to be the guy who does the exact same workout and is thinking about working out the exact same way to infinity, right? Like I'm working out and I think very differently than I did a few years ago, and I think I'm going to work out and think very differently in a few years. You know, and that's just part of the growth of progression, right? Not only physically with gains, but also just through time. If you're the same guy 2 years from now as you are right now, not cool, right? You gotta get some more experiences, try to learn some shit. So I think that's all I got for tonight. I'm gonna go home and eat a big old bowl of ground beef, put some sugar-free barbecue sauce on it. I ran out of my the cheddar cheese rice cakes. Those are really good. So I think I might have to just go plain lightly salted. But those are good too. Or actually, what am I doing? I might just make rice. Yeah, save the rice cakes for later. But yeah, either way, definitely getting gradually leaner. I can't really tell yet, but I know it's happening. So I'll just see you for an arm pump tomorrow.